The HOA president called. Your son doesn't belong here. 3 days later, police found my nonverbal boy 300 miles away on a dark highway, terrified and alone. He couldn't speak to tell them what happened. They had no idea his mother was a judge. Big mistake. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was in my courthouse office, finishing up paperwork from a custody hearing. The autumn sun was setting through my window, painting everything in warm orange light. I had no idea my world was about to fall apart. This is Judge Sarah Anderson, I answered. Judge Anderson, this is Officer Mike Torres from the State Highway Patrol. We need you to come to the station immediately. We found a young man on Route 45, approximately 300 miles east of Riverside. He's nonverbal and appears to be around 15 years old. He had your business card in his backpack. My mouth went dry. Can you describe him? African American, about 5 feet 4 inches, wearing a red hoodie and jeans. He has a small scar above his left eyebrow. Ma'am, he seems very scared and confused. He keeps pointing at things but we can't understand what he's trying to tell us. The phone almost slipped from my hands. The scar. The red hoodie I bought him last week. That was Marcus. My beautiful, sweet Marcus, who had never spoken a word in his 15 years of life but who communicated through gestures, expressions, and the most loving hugs you could imagine. That's my son, I whispered. That's my baby. I'm coming right now. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the courthouse. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start my car. Marcus was supposed to be at his friend David's house, just 4 blocks away from our home in the quiet Riverside neighborhood. How did he end up 300 miles away? The 3-hour drive felt like 3 years. My mind kept racing with terrible thoughts. Was he hurt? Was he hungry? Was he scared? Marcus didn't understand danger the way other kids did. He trusted everyone. He smiled at strangers. He thought the whole world was as kind as our little neighborhood. I called my sister, Jennifer. Jen, something happened to Marcus. Someone took him. I'm driving to the highway patrol station now. What? Who would do that? Sarah, I'm coming with you. No, stay at my house. Call Detective Miller and tell him everything. Tell him Marcus was supposed to be walking home from David's house at 5 p.m. Tell him to check all the cameras on Maple Street. When I finally reached the highway patrol station, I ran inside so fast I almost knocked over a chair. Where is he? Where's my son? Officer Torres led me to a small room. And there he was. Marcus was sitting on a blue plastic chair, wrapped in a gray blanket, his eyes red and swollen from crying. When he saw me, he jumped up and ran into my arms, his whole body shaking. I held him tight and cried into his hair. I'm here, baby. Mama's here. You're safe now. After Marcus calmed down a little, we sat together while Officer Torres and a social worker named Lisa tried to understand what happened. Marcus couldn't speak, but he could show us. He was smart. He had learned to communicate in his own way. He pointed to himself, then made walking motions with his fingers. He was walking home. Then he made a square shape with his hands. A vehicle. He pointed to 2 fingers. 2 people. His face changed, becoming scared. He made grabbing motions, showed himself being pulled, then covered his mouth like he was trying to scream but couldn't. My heart broke into a million pieces watching him relive his nightmare. Officer Torres recorded everything as Marcus continued. He showed us a long drive, pointing out the window again and again to indicate hours passing. Then he showed being pushed out, falling, and being left alone in the dark. Did you see their faces? I asked gently. Marcus nodded. He pointed to his own face, then made gestures around his head. Officer Torres brought out a tablet with pictures. After several minutes, Marcus became very excited. He pointed at a picture of a white van. A white van, Torres confirmed. Good job, Marcus. You're very brave. But then Marcus did something that confused everyone. He made a gesture like he was writing, then pointed at houses, then made an angry face. Houses? Lisa asked. Someone who deals with houses? Marcus nodded hard. He kept making the writing gesture, then pointing, then showing angry faces. That's when it hit me. The HOA, I said slowly. Marcus, was this about the homeowners association? His face lit up. Yes. He nodded over and over. I called Detective Miller immediately. John, I need you to investigate our HOA president, Robert Crawford. I think he has something to do with Marcus's kidnapping. The HOA president? Sarah, that's a serious accusation. I know. But Marcus keeps pointing to houses and making angry gestures. And Robert has been sending us letters for months. It was true. Ever since Robert Crawford became the HOA president 2 years ago, our lives had become difficult. The letters started arriving every few weeks. The first letter came just 3 weeks after Crawford took over as HOA president. I remember opening it at my kitchen table while Marcus was doing his homework. The letter was typed on official HOA letterhead, cold and formal. Dear Mrs. Anderson, we have received concerns from multiple residents regarding your son's activities in common areas. Please ensure he remains supervised at all times. I was confused. Marcus was always supervised. He walked to his friend David's house, which was only 4 blocks away. He played in our backyard. He went to the community park with me. What activities were they talking about? The second letter arrived 2 weeks later. This one was more specific and more cruel. Your son's vocalizations during his evening walks are causing distress to residents. While we understand his condition, we must prioritize the comfort of all homeowners. Please consider alternative routes that avoid high-traffic areas. Marcus's vocalizations. He meant the happy sounds Marcus made when he was excited. Marcus couldn't form words, but he could make sounds. When he saw a butterfly or a friendly dog or when he was just happy to be outside, he would make these joyful noises. They weren't loud. They weren't scary. They were just Marcus being Marcus. I threw that letter away and tried to forget about it. But the letters kept coming. Every month, sometimes twice a month, Crawford sent new complaints. Your son's loud noises during his evening walks are disturbing residents. The boy's unusual behavior is concerning to families with young children. We have received multiple complaints about your son's presence in the common areas. I had ignored them. I thought Robert was just an ignorant man who didn't understand disability. I never imagined he would actually hurt Marcus. Detective Miller started investigating immediately. And what he found made my blood boil. Robert Crawford wasn't just ignorant. He was dangerous. Over the next week, the detective uncovered a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. 3 years ago, a family with a daughter who had Down syndrome suddenly moved out of our neighborhood. The Johnsons. I remembered them. They had seemed happy, then one day they were just gone. 2 years ago, an elderly man with Parkinson's disease who lived with his daughter's family also left suddenly. Mr. Walsh. He used to sit on his porch and wave at everyone. Then his family sold their house and moved to another state. Last year, a young couple with an autistic son moved in, stayed only 6 months, and left. The Peters family. Their son, Tommy, had become Marcus's friend. Then they were gone. Detective Miller found something else. In each case, the families had filed police reports about harassment. Anonymous threatening letters. Their car tires slashed. Garbage dumped in their yards. Dead animals left on their doorsteps. But nothing could be proven. No one was ever arrested. And in each case, Robert Crawford had been the HOA president. I knew I had to be careful. As a judge, I couldn't let my emotions compromise the investigation. But as a mother, I wanted to destroy the person who hurt my child. I hired a private investigator named Rachel Stone. She was the best in the state. Within 2 weeks, she found the connection I needed. Robert Crawford owned a construction company called Crawford Builders. 2 of his employees were brothers named Kyle and Brandon Stevens. They drove a white van. The same type of van Marcus had identified. Rachel dug deeper. She found Crawford's bank records through a legal subpoena. 3 days before Marcus was taken, Crawford had withdrawn $8,000 in cash. Security cameras at his office showed him handing a large envelope to Kyle Stevens. But we needed more. We needed someone who saw what happened. That someone was Mrs. Patricia Wilson, our 70-year-old neighbor who lived across the street. Detective Miller knocked on her door one evening. "Mrs. Wilson, did you see anything unusual on Tuesday, October 15th, around 5 p.m.? She looked nervous. I don't want trouble. Ma'am, a 15-year-old disabled boy was kidnapped. He was left 300 miles away, alone and terrified. If you know something, please tell us." Mrs. Wilson started crying. "I saw it. I saw everything. I was watering my plants by the window. That white van pulled up next to Marcus while he was walking home. 2 men got out. They grabbed him so fast. Marcus tried to get away but he couldn't. They just threw him in the van and drove off. Why didn't you call the police immediately?" "I was scared. I called 1 hour later, but I was so afraid." "But Judge Anderson, there's more. I saw Mr. Crawford talking to those men the day before. I was taking out my trash when I heard him. He said, 'The kid needs to go. He's ruining everything. Make sure he doesn't come back.' He gave them money right there on the street." Finally, we had our witness. Detective Miller and the FBI, because kidnapping across state lines is a federal crime, worked together to arrest Kyle and Brandon Stevens. When they were caught, they both broke down quickly. "We didn't want to hurt the kid," Kyle said, tears running down his face. "Crawford paid us $8,000. He said the boy was scaring people in the neighborhood, that he was dangerous, that families were moving out because of him. He said just take him far away and leave him somewhere safe where someone would find him. But we drove 300 miles, Brandon added. We left him at a rest stop. We thought someone would help him right away. We didn't know he couldn't talk. When we realized he couldn't tell anyone what happened, we felt sick. But Crawford said if we didn't do it, he'd make sure we never worked again." Both brothers agreed to testify against Crawford in exchange for reduced sentences. We had everything we needed. It was a cold November morning when the FBI agents arrived at Robert Crawford's office. I made sure I was there to watch. I wanted him to see my face when he realized what he'd done. He was sitting at his big desk, looking at blueprints for some new construction project, when 6 agents walked in with Detective Miller. "Robert Crawford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, child endangerment, and federal civil rights violations." His face went pale. "What? This is crazy. I didn't do anything." That's when I stepped into his office. "Hello, Robert." His eyes went wide. "Judge Anderson, what's going on? Tell them this is a mistake." I walked closer to his desk, my voice ice cold. "You kidnapped my son. You paid Kyle and Brandon Stevens $8,000 to take Marcus, drive him 300 miles away, and abandon him on a highway. You did this because my son's disability made you uncomfortable." I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because Kyle and Brandon told us everything. Mrs. Wilson saw you give them the money. Your bank records show the $8,000 withdrawal. Security cameras show you meeting with the Stevens brothers. And I have letters, dozens of letters, where you complained about Marcus and tried to force my family out of the neighborhood. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. Mr. Crawford, we also found evidence connecting you to the harassment of at least 3 other families with disabled members. The Johnsons, the Walshes, and the Peters family. All of them were driven out of Riverside because of your actions. Crawford's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard in his chair. I leaned over his desk. You made a big mistake, Robert. You see, when you kidnapped Marcus, you didn't just take a defenseless boy. You took the son of a county judge who has spent 20 years putting criminals like you in prison. And now, I'm going to use every legal tool I have to make sure you pay for what you did. But I'm the HOA president. I was just trying to protect property values. Property values? My voice rose. You kidnapped a child. You traumatized a disabled teenager because you thought he was bad for business. You're not protecting anything. You're a criminal. As the agents led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me. You can't do this. I have rights. Yes, you do. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. And you have the right to spend the next 30 years in federal prison thinking about what you did to my son. The trial began 4 months later. I couldn't be the judge on the case obviously, because Marcus was my son. Instead, Judge William Harper, a respected federal judge, presided over the case. The prosecutor was a fierce woman named Diana Chen. She had built an airtight case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, this case is about a man who believed that some children don't deserve to exist in his perfect world. Robert Crawford looked at Marcus Anderson, a sweet 15-year-old boy who has never hurt anyone, and decided that this child needed to disappear. She presented all the evidence. The bank records. The security footage. Mrs. Wilson's testimony. The Stevens brothers' confessions. And most importantly, she played the video of Marcus showing what happened to him. The jury watched in complete silence as Marcus used gestures to show how he was grabbed, thrown into a van, driven for hours while scared and confused, and then abandoned on a dark highway miles from home. Several jury members were crying. Crawford's attorney, a man named James Peterson, tried to defend him. He suggested that Marcus had run away. He claimed the Stevens brothers acted on their own. He even tried to argue that Marcus's disability made his testimony unreliable. That was his biggest mistake. Diana Chen stood up, her face angry. The defense wants you to believe that Marcus Anderson, a nonverbal 15-year-old boy, somehow ran away from home, hitchhiked 300 miles, and then made up this entire story. Why? For attention. Does this make any sense? She held up a photo of Marcus from the night he was found. He looked so small and scared in that picture. This is what the defense calls unreliable. I see a traumatized child who was ripped from his home, driven across state lines, and left alone in the dark. I see a boy who couldn't scream for help because he has no voice. I see a child who did nothing wrong except be born different from what Robert Crawford considered normal. She turned to face Crawford directly. And the evidence doesn't lie. Mr. Crawford withdrew $8,000. He gave that money to Kyle Stevens. Mrs. Wilson saw the entire kidnapping. The Stevens brothers confessed. There is no doubt, no question, no reasonable explanation except the truth. Robert Crawford paid to have Marcus Anderson kidnapped because the boy's disability offended his sense of a perfect neighborhood. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Crawford took the stand and tried to defend himself. He claimed he was misunderstood. He said he was only trying to help the community. He even had the nerve to say that Marcus's presence had caused property values to drop. When Diana cross-examined him, she destroyed every argument. Mr. Crawford, can you show the jury one single piece of evidence that property values dropped because of Marcus? Well, people were complaining. Who? Give me names. I don't remember specific names, but... You don't remember. How convenient. Mr. Crawford, isn't it true that you sent threatening letters to 4 different families in the past 3 years? Those weren't threats. They were HOA notices. Diana pulled out the letters and read them aloud. The boy's presence is unacceptable. Action must be taken. This situation cannot continue. These sound like threats to me, Mr. Crawford. He had no answer. The jury took only 4 hours to reach a verdict. When they returned, the courtroom was packed with people from our neighborhood, families who had been driven out, and reporters from every local news station. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping across state lines, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of federal civil rights violations, we find the defendant guilty. On all charges, we find the defendant guilty. Crawford collapsed. His attorney had to help him stay in his seat. Judge Harper sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Before passing sentence, he had something to say. Mr. Crawford, in my 30 years as a judge, I have seen many terrible crimes. But targeting a disabled child because you found his existence inconvenient represents a level of cruelty that shocks me deeply. You took an innocent boy from his home. You paid criminals to kidnap him. You abandoned him hundreds of miles away, not caring whether he lived or died. And why? Because he made you uncomfortable. Because his disability didn't fit your vision of perfection. Judge Harper paused, looking at Crawford with disgust. You have shown no remorse. You have taken no responsibility. You have blamed everyone except yourself. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. I only wish the law allowed me to give you more. But the criminal trial was just the beginning. I helped the other families that Crawford had driven away to find lawyers and file civil rights lawsuits. The Johnsons sued for the harassment that made them leave their home. They won $2.5 million. The Walsh family sued for the emotional distress and threats against their elderly father. They won $1.8 million. The Peters family sued for discrimination against their autistic son. They won $2.2 million. And we sued for what Crawford did to Marcus. The jury awarded us $6 million in damages, plus another $4 million in punitive damages to punish Crawford for his actions. In total, the lawsuits cost Crawford over $16 million. His construction company went bankrupt. His properties were seized. His expensive cars, his vacation home, his boat, everything was sold to pay the victims. Kyle and Brandon Stevens each received 8 years in prison for kidnapping. During their sentencing, both men apologized to Marcus and our family. I'm so sorry, Kyle said through tears. I should have never listened to Crawford. I should have called the police instead of hurting that innocent boy. I'll regret this for the rest of my life. The judge was more lenient with them because they cooperated, showed genuine remorse, and helped convict Crawford. But they still had to serve their time. The hardest part wasn't the trial. It was helping Marcus heal from his trauma. For months after the kidnapping, he was afraid to leave the house. He wouldn't walk anywhere alone. He had nightmares every night. We worked with a wonderful therapist named Dr. Lisa Martinez who specialized in trauma in nonverbal children. Slowly, gradually, Marcus began to recover. The first month was the worst. Marcus would wake up screaming silently in the middle of the night, his face covered in tears. I would run to his room and hold him until he calmed down. Sometimes it took hours. He was afraid of white vans. Whenever he saw one on the street, even from our window, he would start shaking. We had to take different routes to school, to the store, to everywhere, just to avoid seeing white vans. He was also afraid of strangers, especially men. If a delivery person came to the door, Marcus would run to his room and hide. If we went to the grocery store and a male cashier tried to talk to him, Marcus would panic. Dr. Martinez worked with us 3 times a week. She used pictures, toys, and gentle exercises to help Marcus process what had happened to him. She taught him coping techniques. She helped him understand that what happened wasn't his fault. One breakthrough came after 2 months of therapy. Dr. Martinez brought a toy white van to the session. Marcus immediately became tense when he saw it. "Marcus," she said gently, "this is just a toy. It can't hurt you. Can you touch it?" Marcus shook his head, moving away from the table. "That's okay. We don't have to touch it today. But I want you to know something important. That van was just a vehicle. The bad people are in jail now. The van can't hurt you. No van can hurt you. You are safe." Week after week, she worked with Marcus on this. Eventually, after a month, Marcus touched the toy van. Then he picked it up. Then, in a powerful moment, he threw it in the trash. Dr. Martinez smiled. "You're taking your power back, Marcus. That's wonderful." Another major challenge was helping Marcus feel safe walking outside again. For 3 months, he refused to leave the house except to go to therapy or doctor appointments, and even then, only if I drove him directly there. 6 months after the trial, something amazing happened. We were invited to speak at a community meeting about disability rights. Marcus surprised everyone by agreeing to come. The community center was packed with over 200 people. Families with disabled children, parents, teachers, and neighbors all came to listen. When it was Marcus's turn, he stood up with his tablet. Dr. Martinez had helped him create a presentation using pictures and symbols to tell his story. He showed pictures of himself walking home. Then the van. Then being scared. Then being alone. The room was completely silent except for the sound of people crying. But then Marcus showed something else. Pictures of police helping him. Pictures of me hugging him. Pictures of our neighborhood coming together to support our family. Pictures of new friends he had made. And finally, a picture he had drawn himself, a big house with all different types of people holding hands around it. The message was clear: everyone belongs. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. People were hugging Marcus, thanking him for his courage, promising to make sure no other family was ever treated the way we were. The new HOA president, a kind woman named Susan Richards, stood up and made an announcement. "On behalf of the Riverside HOA, I want to apologize to the Anderson family and to every family that Robert Crawford hurt. We are implementing new rules. Discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated. Harassment will result in immediate removal from the HOA board. And we are creating a diversity and inclusion committee to make sure every resident feels safe and welcome." She handed me a framed resolution. It read, "The Riverside neighborhood commits to inclusion, acceptance, and celebration of all residents regardless of ability, age, or any other characteristic. We stand together as a community that values every person." 1 year after Crawford's conviction, something beautiful had happened. The neighborhood had completely changed. The Johnsons moved back. Their daughter Emily, who has Down syndrome, became one of Marcus's closest friends. The Peters family returned with their son Tommy. He and Marcus spent every afternoon together at the new inclusive playground the neighborhood had built. Even Mr. Walsh came back to visit his daughter's family. He sat on the porch again, waving at everyone, and this time people stopped to talk to him, to listen to his stories, to make him feel valued. But the biggest change was in Marcus himself. The scared, traumatized boy who had been kidnapped was gone. In his place was a confident young man who had found his voice, not through words, but through actions. Marcus started a program at his school to teach kids about disability awareness. Using his tablet and pictures, he showed students what it was like to be nonverbal, how to communicate with people who don't speak, and why inclusion matters. He visited other neighborhoods that were having problems with discrimination. He showed his story and helped families stand up for their rights. And he designed a t-shirt that became popular throughout our town. It showed stick figures of all different types holding hands, with the words, "Different is perfect." On Marcus's 16th birthday, we held a huge party in the neighborhood park. Over 300 people came. Kids of all abilities played together on the inclusive playground equipment. Parents who had once been afraid of Marcus now asked him to teach their children sign language. The local news came to cover the party. A reporter named Michelle Adams interviewed Marcus using his tablet. "Marcus, what do you want people to know about what happened to you?" Marcus typed slowly on his tablet. The computerized voice read his words, "Bad people tried to make me disappear. But good people were stronger. Now I want to help other kids who are different. Nobody should be scared just for being themselves. What would you say to Robert Crawford if you could talk to him?" Marcus thought for a long moment. Then he typed, "I forgive you. But I will never forget. And I will make sure what you did never happens to another kid." The reporter had tears in her eyes. 2 years after his conviction, I received a letter from Robert Crawford in prison. It was 5 pages long, handwritten, and full of excuses. He wrote about how prison was hard. How he felt the trial was unfair. How he still believed he was just trying to protect the neighborhood. How he thought the punishment was too severe. But in the last paragraph, he wrote something that showed me he still didn't understand. "I see the news stories about your neighborhood now. I see articles about how it's become some kind of model community. I see pictures of that boy, your son, smiling and happy. I don't understand how ruining my life made things better. I don't understand how this is justice when I lost everything and he gained everything." I read the letter 3 times. Then I understood something important. Robert Crawford still didn't see Marcus as a person. He still saw him as, that boy. He still thought his own comfort was more important than my son's safety and dignity. That's why he had to be stopped. That's why the 25-year sentence was right. That's why he could never be trusted around vulnerable people again. I threw the letter in the trash and never responded. 3 years after the kidnapping, Marcus graduated from high school with honors. He couldn't give a traditional speech, but he created a video presentation that played at the graduation ceremony. In it, he showed his journey from victim to advocate. He showed pictures of kids with disabilities from all over the state who had reached out to him for help. He showed the 6 other neighborhoods that had used our story to fight discrimination and create more inclusive communities. And he showed one final image, a map of our state with dozens of red dots representing families who had contacted him, asking for help standing up to bullies like Robert Crawford. The message at the end simply said, "Change starts with one voice." My voice is silent. But my message is loud. We all belong. The entire graduation crowd stood and clapped for 5 minutes straight. But the moment that made me cry happened after the ceremony. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, came up to Marcus. She had leg braces and used a walker. Her mother was holding her hand. "Are you Marcus?" the girl asked shyly. Marcus nodded and smiled, kneeling down to her level. "My mommy showed me your videos. You're brave. I want to be brave like you." Marcus pulled out his tablet and typed, "You already are brave. Just by being yourself, you are brave. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong." The little girl hugged him, and her mother started crying. "Thank you," she whispered to me. "You don't know how much your story has helped us. Our neighbors were complaining about my daughter. They said her walker was noisy on the sidewalk. They said she took too long crossing the street. We were thinking about moving. But after hearing about Marcus, we decided to stay and fight. We reported them to the Fair Housing Authority. Now those neighbors have been fined, and we feel safe again." Stories like this kept coming. Every week, we received letters, emails, and messages from families across the country. Parents of autistic children who were being harassed by their HOAs. Families with elderly members who had dementia and were being pressured to move. Young adults with physical disabilities who were denied housing because landlords found them inconvenient. Marcus responded to every single message. He created a website with resources, legal information, and support. He connected families with lawyers. He shared their stories to raise awareness. After graduation, Marcus was invited to speak at the state capitol. The governor wanted to meet him and discuss new laws to protect people with disabilities from housing discrimination. Marcus, now 18 years old and confident, sat across from the governor and state lawmakers. Using his tablet, he explained everything that had happened to him. He showed them the gaps in current laws that allowed people like Crawford to harass families for years before anyone stepped in. 6 months later, the governor signed Marcus's Law, a new state law that made disability-based harassment in housing communities a serious crime with mandatory penalties. Any HOA or landlord found guilty of discriminating against people with disabilities would face automatic fines, loss of authority, and criminal charges. At the signing ceremony, the governor handed Marcus the pen he used to sign the law. This young man has done more to protect vulnerable people in our state than most politicians do in their entire careers. Marcus, you are a hero. Marcus smiled and typed on his tablet, I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who survived something bad and decided to make something good from it. It's been 5 years since that terrible phone call that changed our lives. Robert Crawford is still in prison and will be for another 20 years. Kyle and Brandon Stevens were released last year after serving their sentences. Both men have since apologized again to our family and now work for a nonprofit helping disabled youth. Marcus is now 20 years old. He's in college studying social work. He wants to help other families facing discrimination. He's written a book about his experience using pictures and symbols, which has become required reading in many schools. Our neighborhood is completely different now. Where Crawford's house once stood, there's now a community center called the Inclusion Center. It offers free services for families with disabled members, including therapy, support groups, and legal help. The center's motto, created by Marcus, is displayed above the entrance, everyone has a place here. Marcus still doesn't speak with his voice. But his message is heard by thousands. He travels to schools, communities, and organizations teaching about disability rights and inclusion. And every time someone asks him how he survived what happened to him, he types the same answer on his tablet. The man who hurt me thought being silent meant being powerless. He was wrong. Sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest change. Last month, I received the news I had been waiting for. The Justice Department contacted me to say they were using our case as a model for new federal guidelines on disability discrimination in housing. Crawford's crimes, and the thorough investigation that followed, had exposed a nationwide problem. Hundreds of families had come forward with similar stories of being harassed, threatened, and driven from their homes because of a family member's disability. The new guidelines make it easier to prosecute cases like ours and provide better protection for vulnerable families. When I told Marcus the news, he cried. But these were happy tears. He typed on his tablet, he tried to make one boy disappear. Instead, he helped protect thousands of children. That's real justice. He was right. Robert Crawford had tried to remove my son from his perfect world. Instead, he had helped create a world where people like Marcus are celebrated, protected, and valued. Crawford lost everything: his money, his business, his freedom, and his reputation. Meanwhile, Marcus gained everything: confidence, purpose, and a voice that reaches across the entire country. That night, I watched Marcus through the kitchen window. He was in our backyard, teaching a group of neighborhood kids how to communicate using hand signals and pictures. They were all laughing together, learning together, growing together. He looked up and saw me watching. He smiled and made a heart shape with his hands. I made a heart shape back. My son couldn't speak. But he had taught an entire community how to listen. Robert Crawford had tried to dump my nonverbal son 300 miles away, thinking no one would care about one disabled boy. He was wrong. He didn't know he had targeted a judge's son. But more importantly, he didn't know he had targeted a human being who would refuse to be silenced, who would turn his trauma into triumph, and who would make sure no other child would ever suffer the same fate. That was our victory. That was our justice. And that was Marcus's voice.